I think we can get started.
That's right.
Cheryl and Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. And I think our attendees are really looking forward to hearing from the both of you. Cheryl Dorsey, CEO of Echoing Green, and Kevin Bromer, head of data and technology at Ballmer Group. This discussion will move beyond traditional grant making to explore what it takes to fund and scale what truly works. We'll delve into the roles of evidence and data, the importance of sustainable revenue models, and the critical need for equitable funding in building a better future. So I wanted to start with just defining the landscape and really kind of what are we solving for when we talk about funding tech-enabled social innovation. And I want to start with the both of you. Cheryl and Kevin, you both have a unique vantage point on the world of social innovation. From your perspective, what has been the single biggest shift that you have seen in the last 5 years in how we think about funding and scaling social impact, but particularly technology enabled social impact?
Cheryl, you want to go ahead and kick it off, or?
Sure. I'll speak quickly. I think you'll have a better perspective than I, Kevin. But first, it's so great to be with you both. So excited to learn from you both and to be in conversation with you guys and to be part of this larger gathering. So thanks for having me. From my perspective, the world changed, albeit briefly, after the murder of Mr. Floyd on, May 25th, 2020, when the world stopped, still having to try and process what happened during COVID, when we saw the disproportionate impact on low resource and marginalized communities. And on top of that, an 8-minute, 46-second video putting into full relief the physical manifestation of, structural violence, right? So there was a moment in philanthropy when all of a sudden sort of racial equity, structural inequities were top of mind. And whereas, I don't know about you, Kevin and Vineet, every year you'd get those reports on philanthropy, like less than 1% or 2% of philanthropic dollars go to racial equity. Same thing with gender-based work. And all of a sudden funding really started to flow to proximate leaders, to intersectional leaders, to Black and brown folks. And there was this aperture that was open that I hadn't seen in my 30 plus years of doing this work. It was promising. It was hopeful. And then that's a different chapter, though, because we no longer have that momentum on our side. But for me, that was a huge shift that was noticed in Echoing Green and across social innovation.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Cheryl. And Vineet, thank you so much for facilitating this conversation. Really, really thrilled to be here. Yeah, I mean, I think from my lens, I think, given both kind of the expectation and reality of what public funding is kind of likely to look like, what I've really seen evolve over the last 5 years has really been an embrace of social entrepreneurship as a way of, I think, hopefully offsetting some of the gaps that public drawback has created. I think for so many years, the idea of a nonprofit has been treated like a vertical. It's almost like an operating model, right? The NFL very famously was a 501c6 until about 2015, right? Which is just kind of hilarious to think about. But the reality is that like the nonprofit space, of course, it isn't just an operating model. I mean, nonprofit is fundamentally, it's an IRS tax designation, and there's a myriad of different operating models and structures and approaches to impact that can sort of be included under that umbrella. So I think what I've been most sort of excited about seeing over the course of the last 4 or 5 years is more organizations set up like CareMessage, honestly, that recognize that there's a value to the services, the products, the supports that they're providing that sort of goes beyond just the primary social impact purpose of the organization as a whole in a really wonderful way. And so I think provided that organizations are keeping that social impact purpose at the forefront of what they're doing. That shift has been a really welcome one to see, because it means that these social impact oriented organizations, I think, are doing a better job of capturing the value for themselves. And that's going to help them sort of ensure even longer term sustainability of the broader social impact work that they're focused on. So it's just been a real fun evolution over my tenure here.
Thank you both for sharing. Cheryl, I had a follow-up question. I know that obviously Echoing Green has an incredible legacy of identifying and betting on early stage social entrepreneurs, and we're so grateful that you all chose to bet on CareMessage. When you're looking at a new leader with a bold idea, what are, from your perspective, the non-obvious signals, like beyond the pitch deck, that tell you that this person has the potential to drive real systemic change, particularly because at that early stage, you're really investing in the individual much more so than the idea?
Yeah, I think that's right. And you articulated it perfectly. I mean, we're talent spotters, right? And, we all sort of come to this social impact work from slightly different vantage points. And, we have always invested in leadership for life. And we think you and Cecilia are amazing. You're incredible social innovators. And we think CareMessage is incredible. But, whatever your subsequent chapters are, we're along for that ride as well. So we recognize that CareMessage might be the entire book, or it could be one or two chapters, and we're fine either way, because we're investing, we're, I guess, amortizing that social impact footprint that you're going to have over the duration of your career. So our calculus is different than, say, the Bombers of the world, right? So we're looking at particular qualities that we think are highly correlated with success as a social innovator that have been gleaned just through years and years of pattern recognition. When you look at thousands and thousands of social business plans, we're mostly focused on the leader who writes that business plan, as opposed to the elements of a piece of paper that will radically shift as you get into the work. But a couple of qualities that we've seen that we certainly see in you all and so many other Echoing Green fellows. I won't go through them all. But one is sort of the role of what I like to call blessed naivete. I love it. It's the world is set up to say no, right? It's like, you can't do this. No, this is not how it's done. No, it's always been done this way. And just, it's so beautiful to see social innovators who say, well, why not? Why wouldn't we do it this way? And it's sort of, I was a historian of science in college, and sort of like the Thomas Kuhn, right? There are paradigms which are helpful. They're the rules of the road that allow us to make incremental progress. But then folks like you and Copernicus come along and say, but wait a minute, we think it's radically different. And that, to me, is, when the world says turn left, social innovators like, I think I'm going right. Love that. Another quality that we'll call, just deep humanism, right? Where I'm always very careful when people are talking about their work and they say I instead of we, right? So there's something about the servant leadership that is so very important, and how you show up for your community and how you're invited in, whether you're of that community by birth, by location, or whether you're invited in. And then the last quality that we often talk about is something we call resource magnetism. And it's different than charisma. It's the stickiness of that leader. It's, again, you, Cecilia, you're amazing. You guys are just amazing. You've built this incredible team. But as you look around with all the incredible team members, supporters like Kevin and others, you recognize you couldn't do it alone. So your ability to get other evangelists for your cause, and they go out and spread your message and the impact of CareMessage, there's something about your ability to mobilize and deploy talent and resources that, again, not necessarily charisma, although I think you both are incredibly charismatic, but it is something about the stickiness of your message and your vision that we see so often.
That's really, really wonderful, Cheryl. And I completely agree. Like, I can probably take credit for 3% of CareMessage personally. So that is so true. It's about the team. It's about the group of people that you are able to inspire around a powerful idea. Kevin, I know Ballmer Group is focused on making big bets on what works at scale. And many promising ideas that Cheryl might seed often hit a valley of death or trough of sorrow when trying to grow.
Yeah.
What is the most common reason that you see promising social entrepreneurs fail to make that leap from a successful pilot to a scalable, sustainable organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a lot of different things you can sort of point to, but I think Cheryl sort of touched on probably the most prominent one that I've seen, which is that plan. Once you have that really brilliant social entrepreneur, kind of the next step is figuring out now how are you going to actually execute on that. I've been very fortunate in that I've had the opportunity to sort of talk to maybe hundreds of founders and entrepreneurs at my time here within Ballmer Group, and I think folks in the audience would be genuinely shocked at the number who have a really great idea, have a great concept for impact, and really no sense of how they want to get from where they're sitting today to where they ultimately want to get to, the kind of impact that they want to achieve. I'll never forget, like I had a colleague very early in my career who shared a turn of phrase with me that I constantly sort of go back to, which is, hey, this is great. And I appreciate your values, but don't just tell me your values, show me your budget, show me your plan. And I'm going to tell you what values that budget and plan are reflecting. And I think, for organizations that don't have that budget, who don't know what next year's budget is going to look like, it tells me fundamentally that they're struggling to find the value in that planning and that rigor that I think is absolutely required to run a scalable organization, and especially a scalable organization that's got a hybrid operating model or a double bottom line kind of impact model. And just to be really clear, Vineet, like I don't think it's just about earned revenue generation. I think even having a sense as to, hey, how much do we need to raise philanthropically, because we need this to be purely philanthropically funded, is an incredibly important part. And yet so many early founders that I sort of talk to have a really challenging time articulating that in a clear and concise way. So I guess I would say, like, have a plan, but just as importantly, maybe also have an experienced board or a set of advisors that can sort of help you build and iterate and evolve. To Cheryl's point, the best laid plans, right? I mean, ultimately, you're going to have to make a lot of adjustments and changes and shifts as you get smarter with more information. It doesn't mean that everybody who has a plan is going to be successful ultimately, but I would argue it's pretty challenging to be successful without one in the first place.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kevin. I completely agree with everything that you shared. I'd like to move to maybe, I know some of the folks in the audience are really excited about their concepts and ideas and what they're working on, and really want to maybe better understand what are the mechanics of scale. And so starting with you, Kevin, as you think about the role of data and evidence, the word data driven is used everywhere, but it means different things to different people. At Ballmer Group, when you're evaluating an organization for a major multi-year investment, what does good evidence actually look like? How high is the bar, and how do you balance rigorous data with the often messy reality of community-based work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, typically when we're funding an organization for a major multi-year investment, they tend to be an established organization. So let's go ahead and just set aside for a moment kind of the evidence of the operational sort. Show me your financial, show me your fiscal operating budget. Like, help me understand the trajectory you're currently on, where you've been, where you're going, purely through numbers. I think that's important stuff. But maybe instead, let's shift and talk a little bit about just sort of the impact evidence. And, of course, when we talk about evidence of impact, the gold standard for any organization is going to be a randomized control trial, an RCT. But, frankly, that's a pretty high barrier to entry for even most sort of mature scale-ready organizations to kind of create an RCT out of thin air. I think first, we have this wonderful saying here inside of Ballmer Group. Sometimes good is just good. like any investor, you have to base the majority of your decision on whatever data you happen to have at hand. But sometimes, that data isn't an RCT. Sometimes that data isn't even quantitative data. Sometimes that data can be qualitative as well. And having a passionate leader, a strong advocate, somebody who can bring perspective and context to what the data is showing, and the trajectory and velocity of that data can really overcome, I think, a lot of the challenges that would sort of consume maybe a less experienced leader. Fundamentally, I'm oftentimes looking at individuals in the eye and sort of going, do you believe fundamentally that impact that you're selling? How strong are you convicted as a leader that you're right? And then how willing are you to be able to reevaluate your priors given new and even sometimes contradictory information? As much as we want to bet on pure data plays, it's ultimately has to be a blend of the data that we have available and on hand as best as we can be able to identify that, as well as our assessment of, do we have a leader that has the agility, the flexibility in their approach and how they want to tackle a challenge to get smarter with more information available to them.
Really appreciate that, and I completely agree. I think that there's always opportunity to deepen impact and show that, and being open to new ways to drive innovation, whether it's in the existing model or in new and adjacent models, is something that I personally believe is really important. Cheryl, I just wanted to build on that, and for the earlier stage organizations that you and Echoing Green support, demanding a randomized control trial or something equivalent to that might be premature or even inappropriate. What other forms of evidence or proof do you look for that demonstrate that an organization, or even if it's an idea, is on the right track and worthy of investment?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, an RCT for an early stage organization, it just really is sort of an insurmountable, I think, hurdle. But I do think, thinking about having a plan and how do you measure yourself against the plan, which is, why when we were all starting out our careers, we were taught about the program logic model, right? It gives you sort of a roadmap to sort of pressure test your assumptions and pivot, as Kevin was saying, as needed when you don't necessarily have that rigorous body of data that you might have later on. But I do sort of like, and I'd be curious what what you both think, but Francois Bonici and Cynthia Rayner wrote a wonderful book, The Systems Work of Systems Change. And there were a couple of, I think, important chapters about how we're starting to think differently about measurement and evaluation and the import of qualitative data and ongoing community feedback as one of the most important feedback loops you can have. And it's the learning journey that is much a part of sort of the evidence building process, as is sort of the more traditional ways of thinking about data input. And I think that's really, really important. And I'm curious, Kevin, do you think, a funder like Ballmer, you guys are deploying large sources of capital. Do you think that's gaining any traction, like this developmental evaluation framework?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, as I was sort of hinting at the end of the day, there's always going to have to be sort of a little bit of a benefit of the doubt function, right? Even with an RCT, you can only sort of measure what you're measuring with that. And fundamentally, there's oftentimes so many other data threads that are worthy to be pulled as a piece of that. There are also things that sometimes are incredibly challenging to capture via data, or you're capturing in arrears as a part of that. As you're thinking about a look back, timely data in and of itself can be a challenge. And I think qualitative data, the ability to engage directly with the community, not just stands on its own, but also I think augments and enhances what that quantitative data can oftentimes be telling you, and provide a lot of really critical interpretive context to how that data should be viewed and utilized as an assessment and evaluation rubric.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm happy to share some thoughts as well.
Please.
Here, because this is something that we think a lot about. Our model for the last several years before our 2023 strategic plan went into effect was very much about hey, let's participate in these RCTs and evaluations and validate the impact of the product that way. And those were, successful. But I think the challenge that we ran into was that there's such a gap between, there's a disconnect between the pace of innovation for technology, and especially technology-based interventions, and the timing of the evaluation. And so if one of the goals of data is to help you iterate, per our earlier conversation, on the intervention or the product, or figure out what new products might make sense to develop, then the RCT model is probably you know, incompatible in some ways, because what we're really looking for, and this is kind of the direction that we're going in right now, is like, can we get real time or close to real time outcomes data on the interventions? And through the deployment of our data models and generative AI, can we start to capture real time, how many mammograms are we driving? How many A1C appointments are we helping book? Things like that. And that's, we've looked around for other models that have been able to successfully demonstrate improvement in various specific outcomes at scale in a way that's as automated as possible, and uses like real data on real people, from millions of people, as opposed to a study that's extrapolated to which we don't think is necessarily the right approach for multiple reasons. So I think that's the question for us, is like, can we actually show that? And can we show by the end of 2028 that we have demonstrated improvements in health outcomes for 5 million people across these three buckets of access to care, social drivers, and clinical outcomes at scale, and do that on a consistent basis? That's really kind of what we're trying to do from a data standpoint.
That's great. Yep.
Moving to a different topic around sustainability and revenue. This is a question, obviously, I think about. I know many of the folks in the audience think about. There has been a perpetual debate about sustainability models, earned revenue, philanthropy, hybrid models. And I know, Kevin and Cheryl, you talked about some of this briefly, but how do you both advise the organizations that you support to think about their financial models? And specifically, when does a focus on earned revenue become a powerful engine for impact versus a distraction from the core mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first and foremost, as I feel like I've been kind of hammering home here over the course of the first part of the conversation, I mean, have a model to start with. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to shift or change, but you do really have to fundamentally start by putting down on paper what you think a thing is really going to look like. Your question, Vineet, like, can earned revenue distract from mission? I think for sure, absolutely. And that's really when a leader is truly tested, in my mind. If you surrender your kind of long-term sustainability of your organization, your earned revenue streams, for a short-term impact, is that worth it? And honestly, in some cases, the answer might be yes. Like, if the need is particularly acute, if the challenge is time bound, if future work is likely to overtake some of the present work, like, those are all reasons, I think, to set that earned revenue aside in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not in its entirety, of course, right? But to say, I'm not going to prioritize that big piece of it right now. On the other hand, if you're trying to solve a 10-year challenge with 6 months of runway, well, you might need to rethink your approach a little bit and how you want to try and tackle that situation. And so I think having a sense for yourself as to, is this a time-bound thing in which I need to raise X number of dollars to get to Y impact? Or is the reality that my organization needs to exist in some way, shape, or form in perpetuity, and we're going to have to make those kinds of immediate trade-offs? And, ideally, those aren't always trade-offs, but oftentimes they are. And to Cheryl's point, that's why we look for really strong leaders, because those are not easy decisions to make. And oftentimes those are not quantitative decisions to make. They can oftentimes be qualitative decisions to make, and that's okay. I think we're really comfortable with that, and that's why we invest in leaders in the same way.
And I will only add, once a year, we'll reread one of my favorite articles by William Foster and others at Bridgespan on 10 nonprofit funding models. And it was sort of, just sort of revelatory, when I first read it 15, 16 years ago, whenever it was. And they look at 10 different strategic approaches that are used by very large nonprofits to get to sustainable revenue. And it was interesting, like the aha moment was that they found that really successful large nonprofits typically actually focus on one dominant funding type, and not necessarily earn revenue, but wherever they sort of figure out their lane, they stick with it. And they end up leveraging a specific set of funders, finding a specific funder motivation that works for them, and then working through particular decision-making processes to grow and grow and grow. And the key point is that, and this was really revelatory for me because as someone who focuses on early stage nonprofits, where you are taught and told that you really got to focus on funding diversification. I think it's a risk mitigation strategy. As you get really big, the finding is that you rarely get bigger through this diversification strategy, but it's really trying to figure out where is the match to that single strategic funding approach that you can use to get really big. And I think you guys at CareMessage, tech-enabled, big scale, working with leaders like Kevin and Ballmer who love that, sort of hockey stick approach. So I think that's interesting. But I don't know about you all, but I feel like, but the world has changed when we have blown up all the traditional ways that we've navigated this space. And, development aid is gone and people are figuring out how to do more with less. I think this earned income conversation is going to come back. And I think you all at CareMessage, super smart. You're going to figure out how to unpack that and probably do something with it. But, as an organization like Echoing Green that is as likely to fund a really innovative, disruptive human rights leader, ain't no earned income strategy for that, most likely, right? So I think, again, we're navigating really uncharted waters. But I do think you all at CareMessage, it's interesting time to really think through what could an earned income strategy look like for you.
Yeah, and just to piggyback of what was said, I think for us, like we have this belief that we can support our core operating costs, everything that it takes to support the implementation and providing the service of CareMessage to our customers and customer success and DevOps and fixing bugs and things like that. We can support all that through recurring revenue. And because of the nature of the market that we're actively choosing to operate in, going back to the question of aligned earned revenue streams, we believe we need philanthropy to support R&D that in the future can become self-sustaining through increase in earned revenue from existing customers, new customers, et cetera. But the question that we're actually grappling with is like, is there a model? Are there value creation opportunities that we are that would be worth us kind of exploring that we are maybe not paying a lot of attention to that could allow us in the future to fund R&D ourselves? And so that's something that for us is kind of where we're at. We're trying to question our assumption that we need to raise philanthropy in the long term to support R&D.
Can I ask you guys a question real quick? What do you think,
Please.
like, given the work that you do, the interventions that you provide really sort of speaks again to social determinants of health. Like, would a social impact bond, right? Like you all, it would seem to me would be ideally suited. You can deliver these, these results, and with results-based financing, GDP, so many countries, their GDP is sort of eaten up by healthcare expenses. Seems to me that might be interesting, but I'm curious what you all think.
It's a great question. I think it will require us to invest more resources in we have proven our ability to drive impact in various clinical and non-clinical operational areas. But if I'm understanding kind of what you're saying, Cheryl, I think it might require us to have a stronger story around reduction in cost of care, which I don't think we have yet.
Yep.
because a lot of what we focus on is prevention, and it's very hard to show that prevention drives reduction in cost of care for organizations that care about that. And even though we know that that's intuitively the case, but having to like prove, or being able to prove that in the context of cost of care reduction is something that we haven't really done yet.
Yep. Awesome.
Well, we're at the final section, which is about leadership and equity. And thank you again for these wonderful thoughts. I had a question for Cheryl. You've been a powerful and necessary voice, Cheryl, on the topic of racial equity and philanthropy. You mentioned that early on in the conversation. We know that leaders of color receive a tiny fraction of philanthropic funding. What is the single most important thing that large-scale funders need to change in their processes to dismantle these inequities and ensure capital flows to the leaders who are often closest to the problems?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Kevin knows this. It's never sort of a one-off thing. There's just a way of doing business that the sector needs to adopt and adapt to make sure more folks who look like us get access to funding. And one is sort of relational, like who do you know who's in your network, right? I remember years ago there was this article in some economics journal, the cost of friendship. And it said that, most of us will source from our own networks, where we went to school, where we work, where we worship, all that kind of stuff. But it didn't lead to better outcomes on sort of the venture side, right? And I think that's true in philanthropy as well. So, being proactive about opening up your networks, really, really key. And, there was always that joke, for folks of color, you go to like a nonprofit conference and you're like, but there's a conference within the conference. Like, what's happening in that room over there that I didn't get invited to, right? Like where all the business was really happening. So it requires funder to just really open up and expand those opportunities. I also think that the work of structural inequity, regardless of whatever kind of structural inequity, requires a different understanding that it's not necessarily linear, right? Like it's multifactorial, it's complicated. It requires long-term movement building activities that aren't necessarily easily calculated. So that requires a shift in the way that we think about things. And a lot of funders, for a whole host of reasons, are not amenable to that sort of qualitative, nonlinear thinking. And I do think a lot of the frameworks for doing philanthropy come from the business community. So sort of risk. And, they throw folks who look like us doing this kind of work into it's a risky proposition. And we got to shift that, right? So it really requires a set of behavioral changes. And, I got to say, I'm certainly grateful to the Ballmer Group because, we were able and are still in partnership with the Ballmer Group on doing work on investing in Black nonprofit leaders. And they're amazing. And sort of, I do think it was a real risk for Ballmer to do it. You're later stage funders. You came in very early, but you're trying to sort of build an ecosystem where these amazing early stage folks could eventually get to the stage where Ballmer is investing. And that's courageous and amazing. And we're so grateful for that kind of support every single day. But more needs to happen. So it's like you got to do the work. You got to make the road by walking.
Kevin, if you'd like to say anything, I had a follow-up question for Cheryl.
No, yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and was thrilled to be a very, very small part of that work and partnership we've done with Echoing Green, and it's led by one of my dear colleagues, and just couldn't be more proud of that. I think Cheryl articulated it so well. Like you have to kind of build the world that you want to see, especially to sit here and say, hey, we're a later stage funder, but we're not seeing what we want to see. Well, you have to take some responsibility to be able to address that, and I think that's true for all funders.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that. I was curious, Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind, if there's an example of that qualitative nonlinear thinking that you referenced, like what is maybe an example of something that represents that from your perspective requires more awareness or understanding or knowledge sharing within the philanthropic community?
Yeah, gosh, so many examples, but maybe because I'm sort of like hurrying to head to Kenya next week, and I'll be there for a couple weeks, and really psyched to see a bunch of Echoing Green fellows. And I'm, crashing at the house of one of Echoing Green fellows. I'm like, so I get to hang with my peeps and be super excited. And I don't know if you've ever spent any time with them, Vineet, but Kennedy Odede and Jessica Posner Odede, who started Shining Hope for Communities, which is now the largest community and economic development organization in all of Kenya. Serves a couple million people. Kennedy this summer won the Mandela Prize from the United Nations, which is only given once every 5 years to sort of a world-changing leader. And when we invested in Jess and Kennedy, they had started a school for girls in the slum of Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in Africa. And the idea was, if we show the worth and utility of girls, it will change the culture of this community where girls are marginalized, subject to predatory behavior, and just don't have the same life opportunities. Well, they now have like a microfinance business, an aerial clean water, aerial piping infrastructure. They've got, a health clinic. And funders would often say, well, this seems piecemeal. Why are you not focused on whatever? But it was a holistic, bottom up, community driven process that has transformed and, as they say, disrupted an urban slum that is now sort of, cascading across Kenya and the African continent. Like, that to me is a beautiful example of how sort of a linear thinking, like, well, no, we should be scaling the school for girls. You're off, you're off plan. Water aerial system. What are you talking about? But it is organizing, it is innovation, it is community engagement, all wrapped up into this incredible thing led by these incredible leaders and their extraordinary team. And it works. It really works. So I think that's one of my favorite examples. And that's why I just sort of appreciate leaders. We follow the leader. We go where you go.
It's an incredible example, and appreciate you sharing. And I think it just reminds me of some of the conversations that we've had internally, that it's almost never the case that a single intervention can solve a systemic problem, right? It just can't. And it also reminds me of when we went through Y Combinator, this notion of doing things that don't scale, and trying to, I think there's a predilection to try to scale things prematurely and try to, like maybe an overemphasis on that versus like really trying to validate a customer need or a problem or a solution in perhaps non-scalable ways, and doing that before exploring. And it sounds like SHC has done that in spades. So it's a great example. Kevin, I wanted to ask you about mobility and systems change. And specifically, like, how do you differentiate between funding a good program and investing in a true systems change effort? And what role do you see for philanthropy in influencing policy and public funding to create lasting change?
Yeah, it's a great question, Vineet. And I think fundamentally you have to be able to do both of those things, while also recognizing that kind of a key part of systems change work is funding great programs. I mean, I think there are some systems where the opportunity for change is ripe, it's ready for impact and for influence, right? It might be because it's a hot button issue, or something's changed in the broader social landscape. And so if those characteristics are there, I think there's absolutely a chance to make a multi-prong, multi-investment effort, both at a policy level, at an implementation level, to really catalyze change in a particular issue area or within the context of an existing program. But I think, sort of for other areas, the system might actually be working well, or the system might be less mature and need to be proven out, or it is for any number of different reasons, like not ready for change. But the work that organizations do to sort of deliver services and supports in the community, I mean, that work has to continue either way. So I don't really think about kind of systems change work and funding really great programs as mutually exclusive paths. I think in the best case scenario, they are mutually reinforcing paths in how we try and address some of the social issues. Ultimately, whether we like it or not, and even in the current context, government is a bigger funder of social services and supports than philanthropy ever actually even can be over the long term. So absolutely, philanthropy has a critical role to play, both in de-risking some of that experimentation, de-risking some of that R&D, like you were talking about earlier, Vineet, but also helping the public sector kind of figure out what works so it can pick out the right evidence-based solutions with the right sort of sets of policy supports from the philanthropic universe, to try and address the identified challenges head on. Like, it really does need to be a yes and approach to how we do that work, and that is very much a lens we try and bring across kind of all of our national impact areas.
Cheryl, curious if you have any thoughts there to add.
No, I think that was well said.
Awesome.
Yep.
So my last question, and thank you again for sticking with me through this. This has been really, really wonderful. I've learned so much from this conversation. It's a question for both of you. Looking ahead, what is the one piece of advice you would give to the social entrepreneurs in our audience today as they navigate this complex landscape, the current moment in particular?
Okay, does Kevin refuse to answer this question? What happened to Kevin? Am I left?
No.
Uh-oh.
Have I lost you as well?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh dear. Okay.
Well, I'll start while we're waiting for Kevin to get his picture back. It's really funny that for years, obviously, as someone who works at Echoing Green, I get invited to a lot of things to talk about. What does this next gen young social entrepreneur need to do to start, her enterprise, and what advice to start. And people are always surprised when I say, don't start anything. It's just brutal. It's too hard. It's like, most of us are not entrepreneurs for a reason. It's a kind of a crazy thing to do. And I do think temperamentally and physiologically, human beings are risk averse, which is why we've been around for so long. So I'm just saying, like, just be excellent wherever you are. And in some ways, I do continue to give that advice. I think we fetishize social entrepreneurs. And again, you, Cecilia, you guys rock, amazing. But that's just one lane. There are social innovators. There are policy innovators. There are all sorts of innovators in contextual settings that are absolutely required to shift these systems. And it's just, I think, the work of identifying where you fit best is critical. But in some ways, I sort of think, for you next gen folks, like, we are in a moment, and I'm like, all hands on deck. Like, this is the time to leave it all on the line. I think so much is at stake wherever in the world you find yourselves, whether it's here in a democratic backsliding situation, or whether you're in, Nepal or Madagascar, where young people have had it because they don't see any opportunities for themselves and their futures. So I'm like, just do something. But like, as Kevin said, have a plan. And if, you can't figure out a way to do it as a freestanding enterprise, figure out how to partner, how to collaborate, how to infiltrate organizations, co-opt folks of influence to help you drive change. Because I think this is a make or break moment.
Yeah, really well said. And I know Echoing Green does an excellent job of this from personal experience, engaging networks other than social entrepreneurs, engaging. I know we've done some work with corporate partners like KKR and others. So that's fantastic. Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, Cheryl said it perfectly, right? I mean, have that plan, and in addition to those things, look, if you're relying on public funding, know what you're going to need to do if that funding gets pulled. What is your course of action? If you're trying to scale your organization and scale your impact, know who you want to hire. Who's the next set of people that you need to bring and surround yourself with the right kind of talent, or know what you'd like to build, or at least have a ballpark sense of how much you think it's going to cost, the kind of investment, time, energy, capacity that's going to take to make that happen. Are you looking at AI? I mean, look, I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing about AI. You can sign me up for that group as well. But I recognize fundamentally, like, it's not going to be a fit for everyone, for sure. But at least have had taken some time to think that through and have a sense of how you're going to evaluate whether or not it is appropriate for you and your organization, so that you're not constantly getting yourself sort of behind the technology curve.
Yeah.
As Cheryl said, like, we're in a time of uncertainty, like rapid technology advancement, social upheaval, like all these things have changed a lot of the ways that we perceive how the world could or should work and look. We're not going to be able to predict every twist and turn in the timeline that we're on, but we can do at least a little of that pre-thinking, that planning, be really clear with ourselves and our stakeholders about the assumptions that we're making. And when I say stakeholders, I mean not just funders, but also clear with the audience and the constituency that you're trying to serve, with your board member, with your staff within the context of your organization as well. I think that just kind of clarity of thought, I think it really helps to reassure all of those various stakeholders. And to be honest, I'm guessing as a leader, maybe help you sleep a little bit better at night as well, knowing that we've got a lot of things stacked in front of us right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kevin. I just want to wrap up by thanking our two panelists personally. Cheryl Dorsey is one of the most important people in the history of CareMessage. I don't know if I've said that to you before, Cheryl, but I'll say it here. I always have a special place in my heart for people that believed when no one did. CareMessage would not exist without you and Echoing Green. So thank you for everything that you've done. Personally, I know there's a bunch of organizations that support early stage social entrepreneurs, but I believe by far Echoing Green is the best in the business. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Vineet. That's so kind.
And then Kevin, I really just want to thank you for your support of our innovation efforts, both through Ballmer Group and the support you've provided to enable us to make some significant investments in generative AI and other areas that are going to help us drive health equity in multiple categories, access to care, clinical outcomes, and social drivers, but also your leadership on our board, co-chairing our technology advisory board, helping us think through product strategy, people strategy. I think you are one of the most thoughtful, if not the most thoughtful people when it comes to the intersection of technology and philanthropy. So it's an honor for us to work with you. And thank you so much for giving us this time. I know the audience really benefited from it.
Well, certainly my pleasure, and it's just so grateful to be along on this ride with you, Vineet. It never ceases to be enjoyable and challenging in all the best kinds of ways.
It's great. So great to be with you all. Wonderful.
Thank you both. Take care.
Have a good one, everybody. Such a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.